In this video, I'd like to talk about COVID-19 vaccine trials in Africa. I've been seeing a lot of posts and stories, and also I've come across a couple petitions that are asking people to sign against performing COVID-19 vaccine trials in Africa. They're saying we should say no to these trials, and I'm just here to give a more scientific background, a scientific aspect to it. And I'm sure you're wondering, who am I to provide this scientific information? I am a biomedical scientist. I have a master's degree in biomedicine. I also work in the clinical trial industry. Furthermore, I've also done my research. I've checked the World Health Organization. I have also read a couple of scientific articles published on Nature, The Lancet. I also had a look at the current trials that are active against COVID-19. So that being said, I have my education, my profession, and also the research I've performed backing me up. So how did everything start? It started, I believe, with these two French professors who made racist comments that they should test tuberculosis vaccine on patients with COVID in Africa. And there was then a social media outrage where people said that Africa is not a laboratory, Africans are not guinea pigs, and rightly so. I think we should not entertain such information or such comments that say that we should go back to colonial times and perform clinical trials in that manner. However, the problem now is that this whole issue has been blown up, and there's this huge mountain of lies where people are taking up the stand to be the experts to inform people that they should not be participating in these clinical trials, that if they receive these vaccines, they should destroy them, and so on and so forth. So that is the problem I'm addressing, that there's now this huge lie, this huge panic behind it. There's so much misleading information out there. There's articles that are saying that there was a clinical trial recently that led to 7 deaths of kids in Africa. There's just so much out there that's just not right, and that's why I'm here to address those things. But before we go into that, I'd like to point out 3 things. To those people who are sharing information about COVID, or especially information about these clinical trials in Africa, you should verify the sources. Just because you've been following somebody for some time on Facebook or YouTube or whatever doesn't mean that whatever information they're going to be sharing right now about COVID is correct and it's reliable. So check their sources. Are they referring to the World Health Organization? Are they referring to scientific articles? Are they actually speaking out of themselves, or are they actually founded? Are they based on something? So check your sources. That's the very first thing. And then the second thing is that I've noticed that a lot of people who are posting these do not perform clinical trials in Africa are Africans in Europe. And my caution there is that we as Africans in Europe are not directly affected. Yes, I understand that it's crucial that we inform our relatives, we inform our people of what's happening. But since you're not directly affected, you also have to understand that this information is not necessarily for you. Because once you get sick, you can easily check into a hospital, given the circumstances. Of course, maybe you stay remotely, or you're in a country where the burden against COVID is just so high. However, if somebody back home in a village got COVID-19, they can't easily check in. So we have to be cautious. We are not really the target group. Yes, we should stand up for one another. I understand that, but it's not really us. Like, we have it more or less a bit easier. So just be cautious. That's what I just want to say. And then the third thing is that you also have to consider the effects of the information that we're spreading. I see that this is just leading to panic. It's leading to fear. But instead, the focus should be on helping people be cautious, helping people be concerned, helping people understand better what COVID-19 actually does, what vaccines do, what clinical trials do. And we should also understand that this is a global thing. We need global effort to fight this thing. So we have one enemy. I know that Africa has been I know that Africa has been mistreated and continues to be misused and abused by many nations, for sure. We should not forget that. Like, we should still keep fighting for our people and so on. However, in this case, in this situation, we do have one enemy, and we really need to have a global solidarity, a global workforce, so to say, to fight this one enemy that we have. So what's the truth actually? Are these trials actually happening in Africa? I came across from the World Health Organization was that clinical trials are actually happening in Africa. There are some drug-based clinical trials that are happening. Vaccine trials, I did not find anything about that. Currently, there are some trials that are happening with drugs. A drug is different from a vaccine, so we need to make that differentiation as well. So that being said, these clinical trials are happening and other trials will be starting. What should we be focusing on? So these trials will need to happen because of genetic diversity. I'm not talking about skin color. It's not about skin color. It's really about genetic diversity. And that what I'm trying to say with that is that in Africa itself, the genetic diversity between somebody from Senegal compared to somebody from South Africa is quite great. And even just in South Africa itself, or in a family itself, there's so much genetic diversity. And therefore, if we're going to be saying, oh no, they should just do these trials in China, in Europe, or wherever it is, anywhere but Africa, the problem with that is that we won't be able to then have this vaccine or this drug sold to a larger group of people. It cannot be made available for everyone because we do not know how it acts in certain genetic groups. So that being said, these trials need to take place because we need to have this genetic diversity to also understand how does the vaccine or the drug work in certain populations. We have to also understand that when a drug or a vaccine is created, it's not just like, oh, I found something, let's test it in this human being. It's not like that. There's so much going on behind. First of all, there's the exploration, there's the studies in just cells, in vitro, and then there's the studies in animals, and then there's a study in a very small population of patients, and small population of people. These are phase 1. It's only when you get to a later phase that it's then expanded into a larger population. So it's not just like it just happens anyhow as well. There is a mechanism, there are standardized procedures, like apart from this panic and so on. What should be the focus? How can we ensure that these trials are going to take place in the right way? So we need to ensure that these trials that are going to take place are ethical and scientifically sound. And I think the ethical part of it was why there was such an outrage initially, and that's understandable. Ethics is very important in clinical trials. We just don't want to be having patients participating in trials because they were forced, because they were bribed. We want patients, we want subjects to participate in these trials because they voluntarily accepted to do so. They voluntarily consented to do so. It's that the consent process is accurate, that the person understands what they are participating in, and therefore we need to use images or videos to get the message across, and not using technical scientific terms but layman terms, so that the people can understand the risks, the benefits, can see the whole shebang. And apart from the informed consent process, which is crucial, because if we see that patients' safety, that patients were forced to participate, whatever data arises from these trials is not scientifically sound, it's not valid anymore, because we know that it did not arise from the standardized way. There's a whole regulation of ethical standards, like a whole system of ethical standards. There's the Declaration of Helsinki, there's the Nuremberg Code. We also have the International Conference of Harmonization, Good Clinical Practice. These are ethical standards, these are global. And again, the first and foremost important thing is patient safety. Safety is of crucial importance. If there's anything that would affect the safety of the patient, the trials would have to be stopped. So then we see that at the end of the day, these trials will take place, and we have to ensure that they're taking place in the right environment, under correct consent procedures, and also understanding that the persons performing these trials, the doctors, the nurses, everyone involved is educated and also understands the ethical standards. We might also have to circumvent limitations such as facilities, or costs, and so on and so forth. So the truth is, these trials are taking place, but we have to ensure that we're ready for them. That's why we need to ensure that people are participating voluntarily, and also that even after the trial is finished, that these people have access to the medicines. Because previously in the past, after the trial was done, people didn't have this access, or they couldn't even just afford the drug because it was just so expensive. Another thing that I really like to stress here is that clinical trials are good, and we know that prevention is better than cure, and that's what vaccines do. Vaccines prepare you so that when you have the real disease, your body has antibodies, and you won't be as greatly weakened or affected by the actual disease because you're ready for it. So we should not be spreading this information that's telling people to not participate in these trials, to destroy these vaccines, because we know that vaccines will prevent the spread of the disease. Trials are not something new. Any medication that you take, whether it's Panadol, ibuprofen, or I don't know, a syrup, whatever medication that you take has undergone various testings. So it always starts in the lab with some cells, and then it goes into animals, and then eventually it starts phase 1 with a small group of patients, and these are then extended, and so on and so forth. So clinical trials already happened for drugs that you're taking. Clinical trials have happened already, they are nothing new. We have vaccines already for polio and smallpox, and these vaccines work. Before these vaccines, people were literally dying from these diseases. People were suffocating with polio because the virus literally weakens your airway muscles, or people were lame, they were disabled for their whole life because the vaccine was not there. So we have to be careful with the information that we're spreading, because the more we spread that they shouldn't be doing these vaccine trials and so on, the more we'll raise suspicion about the accuracy or the benefits of vaccines. And we see that vaccines are actually good because we ourselves have taken them. So I think the question is no longer that will clinical trials take place in Africa against COVID-19. The question is more, when these trials are going to take place, are we ready for them? Do we have the right equipment? Do we know that the information that is provided is accurate? Are we ready for them? And if we're not ready, what can we do to be ready for that? So I hope that this video was informative, that it really differentiated the lies from the truth, the science from the fiction, and also helped you understand how clinical trials actually work. I didn't want to go too much in depth because of time as well. I don't want to talk forever. So I hope that I hope you've learned something, and please do not forget to comment, do not forget to like, to also share this video. My prayer and hope is that you stay safe and healthy, and until next time.